Okay, hi everyone. My apologies for the ending the class early today because of the fire alarm. Let's finish up the class based on the last set of notes that we had here. Okay, so we got through if statements, then if else statements, and now if and else if statements. So this allows us to do far more complicated and interesting selections of MATLAB or other programming language programming statements. So the if-else-if statement allows you to conditionally execute one of multiple blocks of MATLAB statements. Okay, so that allows you to do many different types of options. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So if-else statement and if-else-if. Okay, so basically what's going on here is that if we start with an if, as we have right here, we will always end it with an end. So if and end are together here. Now, if the logical condition that follows the if statement right here is true, so if it's true, then this portion of the MATLAB code will execute, and that's the code that is found between the if statement and the between the if statement and the else if part of the statement. Okay, so if it's true, then all of the code that we would have right here between the words if and else if will execute. If, on the other hand, this is false, so if this part is false, then we don't execute this. We go and test the condition related to else if. So then what we do is we take a look here, and there will be another logical condition here. Okay? And there'll be some statement, x is greater than something, or y is less than something else, or maybe my variable is equal to 42, or something like that. It'll be some logical condition that follows the word else if. And if that is true, okay, so if the result of the logical condition 2 is true, or a Boolean value of 1, then the section of code that is found between else if and the next statement, which would be an else or maybe even another else if, all of this code will run, but only if the result of the else if logical condition is true. Finally, if logical condition 1, so this one right here, is false, okay? So if it's false, and logical condition 2, this one right here, is also false. So if something results in false, and else if something results in false, then we go and we test the next condition. Now the next condition right here is the default else condition. It's not actually testing anything. So if any of the other things fail to give you a true value, then this kicks in. Okay, so think of this as sort of a default. And then if the first statement is false and the second statement is false, then basically the code that follows the else word right here and the word end will execute. This will go. Okay. Then we get to the end of the if-else statement. If, else, if, else statement. We get to the end of it. And then anything that is seen after it, any other MATLAB code that follows it, will execute. All right. So if, else, if statements. So write a function that returns a sorted vector of 3 numbers. So what we have here is, again, a function. This is an output. This is the function name. Okay, so that's the name of the function. And x, y, and z are the 3 input arguments. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort through this, and we're going to say if, we're going to put, it's typically better to put a set of parentheses around here. Okay, so if x is less than or equal to 1 and x is less than or equal to z, then we're going to take the output variable s and make it equal to the value x. Now, if that's not true, then we're going to test this. So if it turns out that this is false, then we're going to test the condition that follows else if. We're going to ask, is y less than or equal to x, and is y less than or equal to z? And that should be in parentheses like this. If it's true, then this is the code that executes. If it's false, so that doesn't make a true statement, say that's false, then by default we take a look at the last condition, which is else, and that's any other thing. Any other condition basically gets encapsulated here, and there's no test that occurs. It's just it's the default. It's the default condition, and this will say that s is equal to z. So by default, if the other two are false, then s, the output, is equal to z, and then at the end, what will happen is s will return a value to the output of the function called s, right? It goes to the output, and that's what will be sent out by the function as an output. All right, here's another if else if statement. So there are different categories for hypertension or blood pressure defined by the American Heart Association, and there's 3 categories. There's 1, 2, and 3. The first one is normal, and that's when a systolic pressure of 122 millimeters of mercury or less is found, and a diastolic pressure. So these are 2 different types of pressures that are measured with those pressure cuffs that doctors use or nurses. And so if the systolic pressure is less than 120, and and that would be the ampersand sign, so that would be something like this. Okay, that's and the diastolic pressure is less than 80 millimeters of mercury, that's Hg, mercury, then we have normal blood pressure. If, on the other hand, we find that the systolic pressure is somewhere between 120 and 139 millimeters of mercury, or it's between 80 and 89 millimeters of mercury for the diastolic pressure, so the 2 different pressure measurements, then what we have is pre-hypertension. That's a condition, a medical condition. Finally, if it turns out that the systolic pressure is greater than or equal to 140 millimeters of mercury, or the diastolic pressure is greater than or equal to 90 millimeters of mercury, then we have what's referred to as a high blood pressure condition. And the or is a symbol like this, and you will find that on excuse me, on the key that's right above the return key on a standard US English keyboard. So it's on the right hand side, just above the return or enter key. And here is the function that we're talking about. So we have a function, okay, it's declared as a function right here. We have an output called category, right? If we go back one slide, see, this is the output category, so this is output. And we have a function called cat pressure, all right, or categorized pressure, categorized blood pressure. And we have 2 inputs. We have the pressure in millimeters of mercury for the systolic reading, and we have the diastolic reading as well. So these are inputs. That's input 2, and this is input 1. Okay, so what we have here is we have a function that will return at the very end a value of 0, 1, or 2, and this will be returned in the variable called category. All right, so category will either return 0, 1, or 2, and if systolic is greater than or equal to, often this is a really good idea to do this, put parentheses around there. So if systolic is greater than or equal to 140, or, this is short form for or, diastolic is greater than or equal to 90 millimeters of mercury, then our category is 2. And what would that be? I'm going to put a little percentage sign here, go back here to, let me see, Over 140 and over 90. Over 140 over 90, that's high blood pressure. Okay, so then in a comment we would write down, this is a good idea, high blood pressure. Else if, so if this wasn't true, if the first logical statement wasn't true, then we test again. And we'll put a parenthesis here and a closed parenthesis there. Category 1. And category 1 is for systolic above 120 and diastolic above or equal to 80 millimeters. So let me see if we go back here. Then we'll see that that would be, I believe, for pre-hypertension. Okay, so above 120 and above 80, because the other values were found to be false. So this is pre-hypertension. Now, if neither the first logical condition nor the second, okay, so this one's false and that one's false. If neither of these are true, then by default this has to be true. Okay? And so we just use else. There's no conditional statement or condition that's required after it to test. It's just default condition. So this is default. Because the other ones are not true, then the logic works out that this is the final one, and this 0 would have a comment called normal blood pressure. We end the if statement there, and then we end the function there, and that's the entire code. All right, and there you have it. My apologies one more time for the interruption in class because of the fire alarm that was pulled. Let's see, again, there will be no class on, or no office hour on Friday. I will see you next Monday.